If you've been to a dietitian with your diabetes and you got advice from the dietitian about what to eat, and then you were wearing a continuous glucose monitor after you implemented that advice, you might have said something like, what the hell? I thought this diet was supposed to help my diabetes, not make my blood sugars higher. You're correct. Today I have a wonderful guest, registered dietitian, Michelle Hurn. Welcome, Michelle. Welcome back.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Michelle's been on the channel a few times, and today we're going to be going over why your dietitian says stupid beep. There's reasons.
I can't wait. It's going to be good.
There's reasons for this. And so Michelle's a registered dietitian. She keeps up with her continuing education to keep her license. And in order to do that, she has to have continuing education materials that she studies. And then if it's like doctor, she has to answer multiple choice questions and then turn that in. And then she gets to continue having a license to practice dietetics, I guess is what it's called. And so she sent me some good information, and I'm going to share it with you in this video so you can kind of see behind the curtain, and then you'll understand more about why your dietitian says stupid crap that doesn't reverse your type 2 diabetes at all. It actually can make it worse in many cases. Michelle, you're a registered dietitian. How are you able to say the things that you say on social media?
I can't practice. Currently, I can't practice in the hospital. I left the hospital setting. I had my own health crisis in 2019, and that's when I discovered a low carbohydrate diet. Throughout all my dietetics training, I was told low carbohydrate diets are dangerous. Saturated fat is bad for your heart. Type 2 diabetics need to be eating carbohydrates consistently throughout the day. And then, once I saw just how quickly people were healing on these animal-based low carb diets, and, I did myself, I got really excited about it. I went to our clinical director and said, we can help people. We're going to be able to reverse type 2 diabetes. And I was immediately told, no, we had to follow the nutrition guidelines. That was, per insurance regulations and all this, bureaucratic BS. So I actually left the hospital setting, and it wasn't until recently that I finally now have an opportunity to counsel people on low carb nutrition with Dr. Plant.
Gotcha. So there was some repercussions from you discovering this way of eating that will literally put type 2 diabetes into remission. And when you shared that with the powers that be at your hospital, I'm sure you expected them to be like, oh my God, Michelle, this is freaking amazing. Thank you for discovering this. We're going to implement this and use it for all of our diabetics. But that's not what you were told.
No, that's not what I was told at all.
What can you give us some insight into how that conversation went?
Yeah. So, when I got my own health back, you immediately become curious, like why, if this is so effective for me, I didn't deal with obesity or type 2 diabetes, but I had severe anxiety, depression, a history of an eating disorder. And within weeks to have dramatic improvement. I went and said, okay, at that time working at a hospital, I had access to all the clinical trials available. And I just kept finding more and more about, at that time, specifically type 2 diabetes and low carb diets. Dr. Eric Westman had published his just incredible review. I was like, somebody got off 150 units of insulin in 8 days. We have patients that were diabetic for 20, 30 years. Somebody might be listening to this and they've been diabetic for 5 years, 10 years, we were even told when I was a young dietitian, I was told it was a progressive disease. You could not reverse it. It only got worse. So your goal was to manage it as best as possible. And so, you just become excited. And so I brought every study, I printed things out. I got on, I was able to reach out to a few professionals. What are you doing? How does this work? Okay. And then I set up a meeting with the clinical director and the medical director. And they barely gave me the time of day and just said, oh, that's interesting. Thank you for that. We'll consider that. But for now, we're going to continue, doing the same thing.
Yeah. So they didn't have the degree of excitement that you had and I had and many other people had. They were just like, yeah, we can't do that.
So, they did not. And at that time, it was very hard because all of a sudden you have this ethical dilemma. I think a lot of dietitians out there just don't know, Dr. Bray, the education for dietitians. The education is sponsored by these processed food companies. I mean, Abbott is the makers of Ensure is one of the #1 sponsors, including Coca-Cola, Pepsi, Frito-Lay. And so our education tells us that we have to have carbohydrates. You need them. They're the basis of the human diet. It doesn't matter if you're underweight or overweight or, kidney failure, you must have carbohydrates. And so when I finally got my health back and what do I do? Because I can't I'm now hurting people. And so I will neither confirm or deny that I may have went into some patient rooms and said, okay, I'm required to tell you this, but would you like me to tell you what actually works well? And unfortunately, actually, that was the second time I've been suspended in my career where a patient got really excited about lowering their blood glucose with a low carb diet. And they told their nurse, who told my boss, and I was put on a short move.
So the patient said, I'm eating this way and my blood sugar is getting much better. And Dietitian Hurn told me how to do this. Their diabetes was improving. And they were kind of bragging to the nurse, wow, look at my blood sugars. Man, this thing that Dietitian Hurn recommended really works. And then the nurse told the doctor, and then you got in trouble for improving that patient's type 2 diabetes. Is that what I'm hearing?
Yeah, so they were there with it. They had a massive infection. So, their course to the hospital, they were there for 7 days. And as you know, when you have an infection too, especially on top of already having diabetes, your blood glucose goes up even higher. And so this person, their blood glucose was averaging between 250 and 300, which is very high. And their blood sugars were over 400. And they were dosing them with tons of insulin. And when I went to, we were chatting and I was telling them, and they was like, well, I don't have an appetite anyway, and I like protein. And so, I gave them at that time, I'd made just a super short handout that I had basically borrowed from Dr. Westman. And and within 3 days, the doctor was like, why is their blood sugar going down? Are we doing more insulin? And so it kind of, there was a conversation that the person's blood glucose in 3 days went from the 400s to was under 200 without changing medication. And you'll never see that, or I shouldn't say never. That's pretty rare that you will see that.
And unless you're injecting buku insulin, you're not going to see that with any prescription medication whatsoever. Now, let me remind everybody watching, this was recorded live in front of our private community. And so we've got almost 100 tribe members watching this right now. And you guys in the tribe are welcome to ask registered dietitian Michelle Hurn questions that are relevant to the subject we're talking about. Now, you said that dietitians are taught in school that you have to have carbohydrates. And I've got a bunch of stuff I'm going to show you guys that Michelle sent me, but let me show you this to start with. Any doctor, dietitian, pharmacist, healthcare professional watching this, and I know we have many that watch this, I want you to look at this. This is, can you see that, Michelle?
Yes, dietary reference intakes.
Yes. Okay. This is from the National Academy of Sciences, National Academy of Medicine. This was published in 2005. This is their dietary reference intake for energy, carbohydrate, fiber, fat, fatty acids, cholesterol, protein, and amino acids. This is the state of the art. This is the latest update. There has not been a new edition of this yet. Okay. And on let me see how. Oh, yes. Okay. So on this is page 275 of that very large work, clinical effects of inadequate intake. Here's the statement. Read this carefully. The lower limit of dietary carbohydrate compatible with life apparently is 0, provided that adequate amounts of protein and fat are consumed. This is in the National Academy of Sciences' own publication. And then they go on to say, however, the amount of dietary carbohydrates that provides for optimal health in humans is unknown. Okay. And then they go on to talk about the Maasai and other tribes that eat nothing but fat and protein and do just fine. But focus very, very intently on this statement right here. There is no lower limit of carbohydrate intake that is incompatible with life. If you decided to eat 0 carb, that's completely and utterly healthy, according to the National Academy of Sciences. So what are we to make of this, Michelle, when we see something like that, and then we're told in dietitian school, oh no, you've got to eat. Excuse me, I'm getting over the crud. You got to eat 130 grams of carbs a day for your brain. Your brain will just stop functioning if you don't eat at least 130 grams of carbs a day. What are we to make of this?
Can we have every dietitian read that book, please? Can that be a required continuing education?
And let's be clear, that book is the foundation of all medical science, under which the practice of dietetics is. That's one of the many disciplines that operates under that umbrella of the National Academy of Sciences. So, I mean, it's in black and white on page 275. Anybody can go and look that up. So how do you think, as a dietitian who's awake to the big picture, how do you think that we go from the National Academy of Sciences say you don't need any carbohydrates to how does that filter down into the training of a dietitian to where they're being taught you've got to have at least 130 grams a day or you might die? How does that work? How does that happen?
Well, unfortunately, I think just like so many other things in life, it's purely profit-based. Type 2 diabetes, it's the second most profitable disease, only secondary to cancer. The latest statistic that I saw was in 2022, and we're talking just the pharmaceuticals, the surgeries. It profited over $420 billion with a B dollars. And
Yep.
so I'll share just a very quick story with you, working with a woman who is 37, and her doctor told her she's not going to make it to 40 because they have not been able to get her blood sugar under 500. Dr. Ray, she's on 200 units of insulin. If people don't know, that is a lot of insulin, and they just can't get it lower. And she ended up working with an endocrinologist, and I worked with her. We put her on a 0 carb diet. She said she's been fighting this for 5 years, and nobody told her. She said, I saw a dietitian. They told me to eat healthy, very arbitrary. What does that mean? And we are on today is day 22. Her blood sugar this morning is 130.
Nice.
And she said, now I'm going to live. She said, she was literally crying on her last video call. She said, nobody told me. And it is our responsibility as the nutrition professionals. And this isn't quick. This isn't like, oh man, in 10 years, we're going to fix it in a year. And this is weeks, And like you said, that is human nutrition. It says look, you don't need any dietary carbohydrates. And I'm not anti-carbohydrate. I think they have their place with athletics and other things. But for somebody who is metabolically unhealthy, you have a disease of carbohydrate intolerance. You have insulin resistance. You can no longer access your own body fat. We can change this. We can fix this. And so, what these companies have done, like Frito-Lay and, these other processed food companies, is they bought the dietitian's education. And not only have they done that, I think it's multifaceted. They also kind of funnel it into the fact that our society is very addicted to these sugars and carbohydrates. Sure. You ask people to give up bread or soda, and they're just like, oh, they act like you asked them to give up their firstborn child, And so instead of telling you, because actually this is a good example. I had a dietitian tell me, well, I would never go in a room of somebody and tell them, drink a Coca-Cola. And I'm like, yes, of course you wouldn't. That's not what they've bought. What they have bought by buying the Academy of Nutrition is when the patient says, I really like Coca-Cola. Can I drink Coca-Cola? The dietitian will say, sure, just do it in moderation. Just do it.
Yeah. All things in moderation. Eat the rainbow. Sheila says, why do I hear eat the rainbow without any consideration to diabetes, insulin resistance, Hashimoto's, thyroiditis, or fatty liver disease? And I honestly think, Michelle, that the average dietitian is just as thoroughly confused about nutrition as the average patient. I think they just they've given up trying to think independently. Yes. They're just trying to get by. They don't want to get in trouble. They don't want to get suspended or lose their license. And they're like, can you just put yourself in the average dietitian's shoes? They're like, I'm not killing these people acutely.
Yeah.
By saying, it's okay to have a Coca-Cola. Just drink the small can and just try to
make sure you eat your vegetables, eat the salad too.
Yeah. Eat lots of fruits and vegetables.
That's another thing is fruit. Fruit's a big thing we push.
Yeah. Fruit's pure sugar, but the average dietitian will tell a severely uncontrolled type 2 diabetic, fruit's fine. Eat the fruit. That's fine. And so then what many people hear is maybe they have poor dentition. Maybe they have TMJ. They're like, I don't want to chew all this fruit. I'm just going to make a fruit juice smoothie because fruit is healthy. So I'll just drink my fruit, or I'll drink orange juice or, magical pomegranate juice because they're so healthy for you. And where does that lead this patient when they've been sold this false choice? Yeah, they're like, okay, don't eat Doritos, don't eat Dingo, don't drink too much Pepsi. but these are fruits. And so
Yeah.
this has got to be good for me, and this will surely help my diabetes. What happens to that patient at that point?
Yeah, and I just want to validate that it's not the patient's fault. In my experience, my patients were really trying to follow the advice they were given. Are like, okay, I'm going to eat the salad, I'm going to have the fresh fruit, I'm going to eat brown rice, I'm going to do all these quote unquote healthy things. But when you have type 2 diabetes, you no longer have the ability to utilize these carbohydrates. And if your doctor's giving you insulin, you're taking insulin, your blood sugar doesn't just go into a magical universe. I wish we talked more about this. It gets stored as fat. And depending on your genetics, a lot of the time it will get stored as visceral fat around your organs. And it is very dangerous. The trajectory for somebody with uncontrolled type 2 diabetes is not pretty. I've been, as a dietitian, people will die. People go, you're going to get amputation, you get infection, because what's happening is that high blood sugar damages your, the arteries around your heart, your eyes, your legs. And the fact that not only can we slow the disease, this is what fascinates me, we can actually reverse some of the damage that has been done. Literally by saying, all you have to do, I love Dr. Glenn even said, and I know you do, as simple as possible. We're just going to take away the carbs. We're going to focus on the proper human diet. We're going to eat meat and fat. And then, of course, dietitians are also trained that saturated fat is bad for your heart. There's a whole group of people that think meat causes diabetes or contributes to diabetes.
Yeah.
And so then there's the fear there. It's like, okay, we're not going to eat meat and fat. And if you don't do that, what do you have? What's left? It's the carbs. So it's this crazy cycle. You don't understand.
Yeah. I'll tell you a story that happened to me several years back in my medical practice. I had a patient who had type 2 diabetes. It was a good friend of mine, and I was working with him. That was when I was first discovering primal, paleo, low carb. And I'm like, I think you need to, and he lived on Pepsis. Okay. He lived on Pepsi and Cheetos and Ding Dongs. That was his diet. I'm like, dude, you got to stop all that. You got to eat better food. You got to cut the carbs. And so he had private insurance, and, many dietitians are employed by the insurance companies. And so his insurance company called him and said, hey, we saw you got type 2 diabetes. Your A1C is really high. It was terrible. It was like 12. And they said, we'd love to send a dietitian to your house to help you understand how to eat. And so they did that. And he paid careful attention. Just like you intimated earlier, patients want to do the right thing, especially when they have uncontrolled, terrible type 2 diabetes. He paid careful attention. They left handouts. They left stuff. And so he converted from his Pepsi Cola and Doritos, and he just started wearing out the fruit. Mm-hmm. And just, he didn't really like vegetables. And the dietitian had said, eat lots of fruits and vegetables. He said fruits first. So that's probably the most important, I'm sure he thought. And so he went to town and he bought one of those juicers, and he was basically living on fruit, grapes, bananas, fruit juice. And he came to me a few months later and he said, something's wrong with my foot. It doesn't really hurt, because he had diabetic neuropathy. He said, but it don't look right. He took his shoe and sock off, Michelle. And just for my years in the emergency department and my training in surgery and medical school and residency, within 1/10 of a second of looking at his foot, I knew he was going to lose a foot.
Yeah.
He'd already lost blood supply to 2 toes. He had huge blisters. I was like, dude, what have you been doing? And then he told me the story about the dietitian who had came and really helped him a lot. And he went on to have his foot amputated. Then he had a below knee. Then it turned into above the knee amputation. And then he wound up losing his other foot. And I tried my best to say, dude, no. But this was a dietitian that was sent to him by his insurance company. And in his way of thinking, and he's right in thinking this, but the insurance company will save money if my diabetes is better controlled, which is true. And so he listened to the dietitian over me, and he wound up losing both of his feet ultimately, and is now in an assisted living, because, you can't really live a life if you don't have either foot. And so when Michelle talks about amputations, blindness, dialysis, we're not joking. We're not kidding. If you let your diabetes go uncontrolled for long enough, even if you're following the dietitian's advice. And so if you're following a dietitian's advice and they've got your A1C down to, under 6.5, maybe keep following that advice. But if their advice is not helping at all, you've got to look for other solutions and other options, because I know you're motivated. I know you want to do the right thing. But if you've been given the wrong information, you're going to follow the wrong information. You're going to trust the wrong person, and you'll wind up losing body parts and losing function. And as I've said many times, there are much worse things than death when it comes to type 2 diabetes. Much, much worse. Trust me on that. You don't want to find out yourself. Let's see what else you sent me. So you sent me some of your continuing medical education. And yeah, here it is. Okay, so this is Diet Nutrition Care Manual. And on the last page, tell us what we're looking at here. Michelle, can you see that?
I can't see, not yet.
Oh, okay, hang on. Let me see. Did I share that? I thought I shared it. Hang on.
No worries.
Okay. Oh, I didn't complete. Here we go. Okay, share. There we go.
There we go.
Okay, so let me go back. This is
yeah. So this was my continuing education. I literally just got about 2 weeks ago. So this is the most updated they have. And so there were three things.
State of the art.
Yeah, this is what they're teaching right now. And it's a liberalized diet for older adults. So think about like our parents and the breakfast, orange juice, oatmeal. It has 1/4 cup of eggs. You have toast, you have margarine.
A fourth of a cup. What is that? 1 egg?
Yeah, I don't even know, right? Like, and then I love that one of my friends was saying the lunch, 2 ounces of chicken for lunch, 3 ounces. Like, once again, the guidelines, they haven't changed. It's these lean bits of protein, and we know as we get older, we need more protein. We need more high quality protein. And I saw this over and over with, the elderly people that I worked with, is when you restrict protein, when you eat less protein, what do you eat more of? You eat more carbohydrates.
It's like they're terrified of any fat in the diet and pretty scared of any protein in the diet. Look at this breakfast: orange juice, carb; oatmeal, carb; then 1/4 cup of scrambled eggs; white whole wheat toast, carbohydrate; jelly, carbohydrate; margarine, vegetable seed oils; and then milk and/or yogurt, which I'm sure is going to be sweetened. Even if it's not, it's still carbohydrates. And then condiments as desired. So you're free to dump a bunch of sugar-filled ketchup on this. And then beverage of choice, which can be that small can of Coca-Cola.
Yep.
Wow. And then down on the third page, is this specifically for
this was specifically for diabetes, because you can see it's a carbohydrate controlled diet. So this is the current recommendation for type 2 diabetes. So if you can imagine,
this is 2024.
If you went into a hospital setting right now, and usually when you go into a hospital setting, if they put you on a controlled carbohydrate diet, it's anywhere between 60 to 90 grams of carbs per meal, which blows my, and think about that, 90 grams of carbs. You can see this one, it looks like they're averaging 67, 77. So this is kind of in between there, but It's amazing to me. This is someone who can no longer tolerate carbohydrates. So every time I take in carbohydrates, I'm causing harm to my body, and we're feeding you basically all starch and just a tiny bit of meat, or quote unquote meat equivalent,
and type 2 diabetes, to be bluntly honest, should be called carbohydrate overdose syndrome or carbohydrate intolerance syndrome. That's what it should be called. And so for those of you who don't know, the chart, the column that's labeled CHO, that's just shorthand for carbohydrate. That's how many carbohydrates are in it. So for breakfast alone, this patient's going to get 67 grams of carbohydrate. But according to their carb count, they're only getting a count of 4.
Yeah.
And then let's look at dinner.
Okay.
So vegetable soup, 3 ounces of baked fish, mashed potatoes, carb; green beans, carbs; small baked apple, carbs. But it's fruit though, right?
Yeah, it's fruit.
Low fat milk. The fat's been taken out, so all that's left is the protein and the carbs. And then a sugar substitute and a sugar-free beverage, and that's 67 grams for dinner. So
you have to have an evening snack, Dr. Berry, after that.
Oh, I forgot the evening. Yeah, graham crackers, because Dr. Graham was an expert on treating type 2 diabetes, and you should always eat his crackers with peanut butter, which is more carbs. And so for a total daily carbohydrate intake of 227 grams, you can see down at the bottom, 227 grams. And so do you think there are dietitians, Michelle, out there who know better than this, but they feel constrained? They feel threatened?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I have dietitians that reach out to me all the time that say, like, I don't know what to do. I'm in a clinical setting. I have, massive student loans. I have bills to pay. And if I go against this, I could lose my job, And so I understand. And they see it. They see their patients not getting better. They see the patients, the blood sugar is high, and they see and even when I was on the floor, I would talk to nurses. I was like, why are we doing this? And it was just kind of like, it's almost like people, I do believe there are people that get it and are just stuck. Like the system has literally made you stuck. And then I also think there's a lot of dietitians who just are still really afraid of protein and fat. They still think that grains and lean is the way to go.
Yep. And there are more and more nurses, physician's assistants, nurse practitioners, dietitians, pharmacists, physical therapists who are doing your strategy, which is they basically run their checklist, right? I just had a nurse telling me this the other day. She said, I run my checklist, eat more fruits and, vegetables, eat your whole grains, blah, blah, blah. And then when she's done and she's checked all her boxes that she has to keep her job, to not get in trouble, she hands them a copy of my Proper Human Diet Guidebook.
Good.
And says, now, when you get home, ignore everything I told you here and read this and do this. This will reverse your type 2 diabetes. But she can't officially do that. And so people listen to this, you can imagine the moral quandary that these healthcare providers are in. They know the truth, like Michelle and I, but they know you need to be on a very low carbohydrate diet if you have type 2 diabetes or a list of other medical conditions. But I will get in trouble or lose my job if I deviate from my checklist. What I have to tell you, what I'm required by law, if not license and employment, to tell you, I'll lose my lifestyle if I tell you the truth. Where do we go from here? How are you reaching out to other dietitians gently, lovingly, diplomatically, or otherwise, saying, hey, you need to look at this?
Yeah. Well, and I also think there's another thing happening is that patients, once again, have tried for so long and they haven't gotten better. It's like, I tried eating healthy, I haven't got better. And so it's almost like they start to lose hope. And so it's like, well, if I'm not going to get better, I mean, these foods kind of make me feel good, crappy food, why not eat cookies and crackers if I'm genuinely not going to? So people don't understand just how powerful food is. Like, I always tell people, your body's ability to heal is greater than anyone has ever let you believe. And it is very quick, and it's incredible. And so, you and I, obviously we're on the American Diabetes Society. Like we want to be the opposite of the American Diabetes Association, which is just, sponsored by pharmaceuticals, and their mission statement, they don't have a diet they recommend, and their slogan is connected for life. We don't want you to be connected for life. We want you to be healthy.
Exactly.
We want you to be free of disease. Our livelihood is not connected to you being sick. In fact, the opposite. Like, where our goal is to help as many people as possible. And so, I always tell people too, the best thing you can do is be a living example. Take some courage. I mean, you have nothing to lose. What you've done before is not working. So by following that proper human diet, by removing the carbohydrates, and it's not a long time. It can take, like I said, I have a woman, it's less than a month, and she's seeing like normal blood sugar levels after 5 years.
Yeah. And can you imagine the cognitive dissonance? Because I'm sure that woman had tried multiple diets and had talked to multiple dietitians and pushed the fruits and vegetables even more, pushed the whole grains even more. None of that worked. And then here comes Michelle and just gives her a few simple tips, because it's not complicated. Mm-hmm. And immediately her body responds and starts to heal. That you've got to just be sitting there as a patient going, what the hell is going on here? How does Michelle know? And none of these other experts, how did they not know this?
Yeah, I'm not joking when she was on the call crying and saying, why didn't anybody tell me this? Like, why? And I don't have a good answer. I mean, we have this information. There's loads of clinical trials. We have evidence, but until the guidelines there's so much money in keeping people sick that we have to keep sharing our story. We have to keep advocating, and I truly believe that people want to get better. And I know there's a lot of dietitians that are starting to question, does this make sense? I don't understand this. Like, tell me. And if you just look at human physiology, and now that we have CGMs, those things, I'm working also with a group that has a 6-month study with type 2 diabetics that have CGMs, and they can see right away, like, wow. One guy said, like, yeah, I know you told me not to eat fruit, but I thought, like, what's the big deal? He said, I had a handful of grapes and my blood sugar spiked.
Yep.
He said, what's been happening to my body? Because a dietitian had told him to eat lots of fruit. Fruit's good for you.
Sure.
He's like, a handful of grapes. He's like, I'll never do that again.
Beautiful,
So,
beautiful. I think CGMs, continuous glucose monitors, are an excellent strategy for anybody with diabetes or pre-diabetes. Regardless of the type of diabetes, you need a CGM because it will immediately reveal who's telling you the truth and who's lying. And so if Michelle is wrong and red meat does cause type 2 diabetes or make it worse, you'll be able to see that immediately on your CGM, because I don't want you to blindly believe me. And I think Michelle is the same way. We want you to follow the evidence, follow the research. Here's a question from Isabel. Oh, sorry. As a dietitian, what do you think about 1 meal a day or 2 meals a day, especially for women?
I was actually telling Corinne this the other day, is I think people eat way too much. Statistically, I think we eat 18 times a day, and they count like if this is just black coffee, but if this was like a sugar beverage, because every time you eat, you get an insulin response. It's very low, very muted if you're just eating fat, but even a little bit of protein, you'll get a small insulin response. Obviously, carbohydrates is that massive insulin response. And so I think it makes sense to eat less. Especially for women, I think eating twice a day is fine. I tend to not think once a day, just because it can be really hard to get all your protein requirement. But if you're doing that and that works for you and your blood sugar is great, that's fine. But I think twice a day, 2 to 3 times a day is great. That's another thing we did as dietitians. You need to eat every few hours, that's a good way to keep people sick. So yeah, to answer your question, I think for women, I would lean towards 2, unless you're able to eat just like a massive portion of food at one time.
Yep, totally agree. Here's a comment from one of our excellent coaches inside of our community. That's where we all come in and gracefully shine the light of truth, backed by science, and open up more conversations. I'll tell you, Michelle, and you know this is true. We have tribe members inside of our private community who have helped people reverse more cases of type 2 diabetes than many doctors or dietitians have. And then Neil has a question. What are the best resources on nutrition, links, books for someone to start educating themselves on proper nutrition and how to know what is appropriate for where they are now?
Well, I just happen to have my copy of my book here. So I wrote The Dietitian's Dilemma back in 2021. And that has a chapter on type 2 diabetes. I really wanted to, the subtitle of that book is, what do you do if your health is restored by doing the opposite of what you were taught? And so, really leaning on what the research said at the time, because that's what happened to me. I was taught whole grains, low fat, lots of vegetables, and I was anxious, sick, dealing with suicidal ideation, gave up running. I was trying to qualify for the Olympic trials and the marathon. And so, as far as resources, obviously, Dr. Ray, you have a ton of great resources. We're going to have more resources on the American Diabetes Society as far as great books. Obviously, Dr. Ray has a book. I think Nina Teichel's book, Big Fat Surprise. Gary Taubes has a great, Dr. Bickman. So I would just, some of any of those resources, or even following those people online, because they're going to be posting studies. And I feel like every time I turn around, we're having another study on what, ketogenic and low carbohydrate diets can benefit, whether it's, traumatic brain injury or Alzheimer's, because so much, and this is one of the things that I've learned being in this space, is disease. Most disease, I believe, is hyperinsulinemia. It's having too much blood glucose. It's having too much
100%.
insulin.
And you can have hyperinsulinemia either from your pancreas being forced to make too much insulin because you're eating too many carbs, or you can have iatrogenic hyperinsulinemia from just injecting too much insulin because you were told to eat too many carbohydrates, and therefore you have to shoot up a lot of insulin to match the amount of carbohydrates. Sheila says, I have a neighbor and cousins who are on insulin. Their doctor is perfectly good with them eating fruit and other bad sugars because they are on insulin, and their levels are maybe 7 or 8. A1C levels, I'm assuming. Why? It's a great question, Sheila. That's literally what I spend all my time fighting against. But Michelle, there are doctors out there who are like, I think doctors believe, and definitely dietitians believe, that if you use enough insulin, that first of all, the insulin doesn't cause any harm, even if you're using way more than you would have to on a very low carb diet. They believe that the insulin is completely benign and safe, number one. And they believe that if you take the insulin or your diabetes medications, that somehow cancels the damage that's being done by eating too many carbohydrates. Do you see that in the dietitian field?
Oh, absolutely. I have dietitians say, well, their blood sugar wasn't high because they took insulin, or they're on insulin, so their blood sugars are managed. That's a good word they use, managed. And it's like that's not managed. You're literally putting a Band-Aid on a problem that's going to continue to get worse. And she said, and it seems like they keep raising the A1C standard too. I saw for type 1 diabetics it's 7. And it's like, why would you do that? I think what's happened is they're like, look, we can't get A1C down on this consistent carb diet, so we'll just raise this. We know there's damage happening at 6.5. We have very good evidence that you're going to have issues.
There's damage happening even at the pre-diabetic levels. That's
even at the like 5 point. So it's like, but I know, so it just makes me so frustrated. I'm like, but people think, oh, my sister's an MD, and she said, yeah, a patient come in and say, oh, well, I'm not diabetic because my blood sugars are managed on insulin. It's like, no, you have to use insulin. It's like, no, we need to get you off this insulin.
Yeah.
So once again, your blood glucose, I get it, because if your blood glucose is super high, maybe the first time someone's diagnosed, they come into the ER and their blood sugar is 600. Yeah, we need to get that down because that's dangerous. Like that's a time we need to give you insulin. But then it's like, okay, now we have to help heal you. Because if not, now we're causing a slew of other problems. Like you said, with the hyperinsulinemia from constantly injecting insulin, and we're forcing that blood glucose. There's nowhere for it to go. You can't tolerate it anymore. So now it has to go get stored as fat. And that's very dangerous.
Absolutely.
So, yeah.
I love Dr. Jason Fung's analogy that when your cells, so your bloodstream's full of sugar and you take some insulin, and that pushes the sugar out of your blood into your cells, right? That opens up the cells, and now your cells are full of sugar. And then you eat more sugar. Now your bloodstream's full of sugar again. You take more insulin, but there's nowhere for the insulin to push the glucose to because your cells are already full of the sugar. There's nowhere else to push it to. And that's what happens for many type 2 diabetics who are eating the diet that's recommended by their dietitian. That's 267 grams of carbs a day, like you showed us. There's nowhere for the glucose to go. You can inject all the insulin you want, and it's just you're still going to have a very high A1C. You're going to be at huge risk of all the diabetic complications. It's very sad. Now we're going to post this on YouTube. It's live right now in front of our private community. But when we post this on YouTube, there are going to be people with uncontrolled type 2 diabetes looking for answers. And Chris asked this question: what would you say to someone who trusts what the guidelines and what the cardiologist, the nephrologist, that's a kidney specialist, and the dietitian is telling them about eating 200, 300 grams of carbs a day? How do you even begin that conversation with somebody they've drank the Kool-Aid? Why would a patient not believe their kidney specialist and their heart specialist? Why would they not believe their dietitian? It seems like they'd be a fool to not believe all these specialists. But then here comes Michelle Hurn and says, ignore all that stupid shit. That's going to kill you prematurely. This is what you need to do instead. How would you start that conversation?
Well, thankfully, by the time I'm having most of these conversations, people have tried their diet or they're pretty sick, especially, unfortunately, if you're seeing a nephrologist, and that's another complication of type 2 diabetes is you go into kidney failure and you do not want to be on dialysis. It's a nightmare. And so I try to have people approach it with a little bit more curiosity. Like, yeah, you've been doing this and it's not really working. Are you seeing any improvements in your blood sugar? Have you been able to get off insulin? Oh, no. Okay. Can I talk to you? And just, there's a blood sugar chart that Diet Doctor has, and it's so simple. I feel like my 6-year-old niece could break it down. It's like this, carbohydrates make your blood sugar go like this. Protein is minimal. And then I also talk about just human physiology. Like, this is another flaw in our education system. Like, humans evolved eating meat and fat. We're designed to do that. Our body responds very well to that. And so especially if people are super sick, I'm like, do you like the diet you're eating? And they're like, no, I hate all this stupid brown rice and salad. And what happens is people will try to get that diet and they'll feel deprived, or they'll eat a bunch of cookies and crackers, and then they feel terrible. Well, what if we tried something else, and so I try to approach it as easy and, well, what do you have to lose? Oh, my doctor says saturated fat is really bad, and of course I can break that down for them if they'd like, but what if this way of eating was able to normalize your blood glucose? You like eating steak? Yeah. What if you could just eat that a couple times a day? Really? So sometimes I try to get people excited. I try to do a little bit about human physiology, but just this would be my message to dietitians too. Like, this is not working. We see the chart. We see obesity going up in our country, diabetes going up. We see, major depression. All these diseases are going up. We have to start thinking differently about how we're approaching human nutrition.
And what would you say to that same dietitian who's obviously seeing that, I'm recommending this way of eating to all my diabetic patients and none of them are getting better? Do you think that dietitian does he or she secretly suspect that the patients are not following the diet? Do they think, oh, they're just living on jelly donuts and Coca-Cola? They're not doing what I'm telling them. Because that was a big part of my problem back when I was an idiot doctor. And I used to tell people, you need to join Weight Watchers and join the gym.
Yeah.
You need to eat less and move more. You need to, stop eating the honey buns. And I didn't realize that it was my advice that wasn't working until I became severely obese and pre-diabetic. And I was like, well, shit, maybe I've been given bad advice. Do you think there are dietitians out there who don't even suspect that what they're doing is actually harming their patients?
Oh, 100%. I think there's kind of like two sets of people. I think there's a set of people and they both reach out to me. The set of people that's like, look, I feel like the dietitian guidelines are terrible. And I are curious and they're open to this new way of eating and they're really interested. And I'll tell you a story, when I worked in the hospital when I got my health back, in 2019, I was eating, I'm showing up with my pound of ground beef. All the dietitians were like, that's weird. And I renewed my health to the point that while I was still working in the hospital setting, I ran my first ultra marathon. I won. Everything in my life turned around. And I had a dietitian that I worked with who, and I'm not shaming anyone, who was massively obese, pull me aside and say, hey, look, I don't think all the saturated fat's good for your heart. It's like, what? It's like, talk about cognitive dissonance. It's like, I could literally and metaphorically run circles around you. And there's just but I and once again, this is not blaming this particular individual because I've been there. It is like put into your head. Think like cult-ish that your brain won't work. Saturated fat will, it's really pounded into dietitians. Another thing that's pounded into dietitians' heads is that anybody outside of the dietitian realm, health coaches, nutritionists, are all bozos. Like, I mean, and they have there's powerful legislation. Most states require a license. Because they don't want anybody that might actually, there's a lot of health coaches that are way better than dietitians that might actually be able to help to kind of step in and do that.
And when I first started being very vocal on social media about a low carb diet, especially for diabetes, I would have dietitians clap back at me like, this guy's a MD. He doesn't know a damn thing about it. Food, right?
MDs are going to be mean to you.
Literally, they were condescending to me, which is they've received much more training about nutrition than I have. That's absolutely true. I got one class for half a semester, 1 hour a week in medical school, and most of that was about how to feed somebody intravenously if they were in the ICU or the burn unit. That's really what medical doctors are taught about nutrition. As far as the care and feeding of a human out in the wild, we didn't get told anything except my nutrition professor, who was a PhD, had type 2 diabetes, and he ate lots of whole wheat pasta. He was from New Zealand, so that's how he fed it. And so the only thing I took away about treating diabetes was, I guess you need to eat lots of whole wheat pasta. I guess because that's what he said he did all the time. And he was a professor in medical school.
There's articles, a lot of dietitians are like, oh, you're diabetic, so instead of white rice, we're going to do brown rice. Instead of white pasta, we'll do whole, oh, you should have potatoes. They're good for, it's in that whole 130 grams of carbs for your brain to function. Well, your body can make glucose from other substrates. It's once again, the education is really poor, and it's hard because I have dietitians just like you, I'm sure do, right, that reach out to me and say less than kind things. And, but it's like, I mean, the science is on our side, and regardless, that's another thing I tell people, like, what really matters is your healing. Who cares exactly how it goes? And of course, you and I could break down the science of it, but when you remove these foods that are dangerous or injurious to you, which is going to be the carbohydrates if you're type 2 diabetic, and you give your body a chance to heal, you keep your blood sugar low, you flood it with this highly bioavailable nutrition. My experience overwhelmingly has been that the ruminant animals, people do much better with the beef and the lamb. And I'm not like anti-chicken, but just as far as like satiation and the nutrition quality and fat, you're just going to be so much healthier.
Yep. Now you sent me this in an email.
Oh, yeah.
Tell us what we're looking at here, and tell us why this is idiotic.
This is from eatright.org. So this is the Academy of Nutrition, the governing board of dietetics. And they said this is the most updated for type 2 diabetes. And it basically says, limited research regarding differing amounts of carbohydrates, 39 to 57%, which is still really high, or fat, has reported no significant effects on A1C. So
Wow.
basically they're saying, if you lower carbs, doesn't matter.
Wow. So up at the top in blue, it says strong. I'm assuming that means a strong recommendation.
Yeah. So on the report, they have like a moderate, strong, and like fair,
Sure.
where they feel like the advice
Yeah.
is. And so
But
this
then
goes
when they get in the black and white, it says limited research regarding different amounts of carbohydrate. And so they're saying a strong recommendation based on limited research that the amount of carbohydrates you eat have no effect on your A1C or insulin levels. That's what they're telling. And this email went out to every registered dietitian who's a member of the AND.
Yep.
Wow. And so if anybody watching, if you have a question of why is my dietitian recommending that, this is why. They get these kind of emails all the time. And so this is what Michelle's fighting against. This is what I'm fighting against. This is what the coaches in our private community are fighting against. People don't know. And the reason that regular folks don't know is because in many cases their dietitian doesn't know. They're just following what the American Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics has sent them an email just 3 days ago saying strong recommendation. The amount of carbohydrates in a patient's diet has no effect on their A1C or insulin levels at all. That's what we're dealing with.
That's amazing. That doesn't even make sense. But if your education has already been based on the fact that, well, I need all these carbs, I have to have all these carbs. Oh, well, shoot, like I guess that doesn't matter. If I shouldn't tell people to reduce carbs because it doesn't matter. It's and there really is a lack of critical thinking. When I'm talking with dietitians, it doesn't seem like you said they're able to start thinking outside of the box. And it would be one thing if it's like, well, our population is getting healthier and everyone's doing better. Like what? It's like things are getting worse, and not just like kind of worse, like really worse. We're on a trajectory to be, the amount of people that are going to have type 2 diabetes by, I believe by it was 2030, it was astronomical, this percentage.
Yeah.
And
Here's something I noticed, Michelle. The average person that just got a regular job, they assume that people with degrees, MDs, RDs, they assume that they are probably better thinkers than average people. And my opinion on that is no, they are not better thinkers. Because when you're given an algorithm to follow, you're a licensed medical doctor, or you're a licensed registered dietitian, and here's the algorithm from your regulatory body. In Michelle's case, the American Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics, and they have a huge lobby. They're quite powerful. They have changed state law in multiple states, it's a big deal. And so a dietitian is actively encouraged not to think. You'll get in trouble if you think too much. And I know for people who drive trucks or sack groceries or cut hair for a living, you're like, that can't be right. A doctor has to think constantly. A dietitian has to think, no, honey, no. That's not how it's designed. That's not how it's set up. It's set up to actively discourage independent thought. You follow the algorithm, you follow the recommendations, you follow the guidelines. And if you don't do that, you'll get in trouble. What hope do you have, Michelle Hurn, for the entire field of dietitians? What hope is there? Are we just stuck with reaching out to one dietitian at a time, like that's currently what we do, or wait for them to reach out to us, right? And say, hey, none of my patients are getting better. What are you doing? Because it seems like you're having a lot of success. Is there another strategy where we can reach groups of dietitians or reach the entirety of dietitians in the world? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I've had some dietitians reach out to me and wanting to put together more of like a small kind of low carb group that would even if we speak locally, like if we're able to speak at kind of our local chapters and like because if everyone is speaking or all the low carb people, because there are some will
Yep.
speak at their local chapters, I think that will help. I think having more, it's going to be hard to argue with people healing. I think the more we see people improving, we are seeing more, studies. We're super lucky to have the Bazuki family that funded the bipolar study. They're funding the ketogenic and anorexia study. Obviously, the American Diabetes Society. I feel like it's not going to be tomorrow or next week, but I feel like if we can continue, to speak out, if we can continue to grow, at some point, we're going to start to really shift the paradigm.
Yeah.
Because
Yeah,
like
I
you
think
said,
you're right.
it doesn't take a long time to start healing.
Right. I think at some point the paradigm will shift. We'll reach that thing, that mythical place called the tipping point.
Yes.
And then it'll become self-evident to every dietitian. Well, yeah, you're diabetic. Of course you should eat a low carb diet. Duh. Why would you think you shouldn't eat a low carb diet? You'd be like, well, bitch, because you've been telling me for 20 years to not eat a low carb diet. Tell me this, Michelle, pull back the curtain for the average dietitian. How irrationally terrified is the average dietitian of their patients or clients eating saturated fats? How mortified are they of that?
Extremely, to the point where I was told that coconut oil is off limits. Like, forget meat. Like, get rid of that. Just lean chicken, grilled. But yeah, saturated fats. I mean, once again, they've removed the thinking. You put it beautifully just by saying like an algorithm. Like, we were basically told saturated fat will cause a heart attack. The end. Don't ask questions. Don't ask the mechanism. Saturated fat, bad.
Yeah.
Non-saturated fat, a little bit of lean protein, okay. Chicken, tofu, fine, but a little bit.
Right. Or peanut butter as your protein source.
Yeah, or peanut butter.
I didn't have any carbohydrates in it at all. But wait, carbohydrates don't matter. That's not going to affect your A1C or your insulin anyway. So, yeah, it's such a mess right now. And you and I and so many others are trying to fix it, but it's an uphill slog. And some days it's a bit frustrating, but I really applaud the work that you're doing on social media. And I don't, people watching this may not know this. You're actually a board member on the American Diabetes Society, the new diabetes organization that me and some other MDs and PhDs created to actually give people with diabetes useful, meaningful medical and nutrition advice. That if you're type 2 diabetic, you can actually reverse that completely. If you're type 1, you can have a normal A1C and use 60, 70, 80% less insulin, thereby not being hyperinsulinemic all the time. And we've got other great dietitians who are working with us at the ADS. And I want to thank you for that. I'm going to try to show this, but I don't want to reveal. I just got this check in the mail. Let me see if I can do this. Yeah. So I got this check in the mail. This is just a regular guy.
Oh, nice. That's incredible.
$10,000 that he donated because my advice, maybe your advice, he's completely reversed his type 2 diabetes. He lost a ton of weight. His blood pressure is normal. His joint pain is gone. And I'm sure he's a small businessman and has made his way in the world. And he's like, boom. And so some people help by sharing their story. Some people help by donating money. People with initials behind their name, like Michelle and I, we try to get on social media and say, hey, there's a better way than what you've been currently told. Michelle, where can people find you? And please leave us with any final words, like for doctors, for dietitians, for people with diabetes. Tell us what they need to hear.
Yeah. Last time I was in my family doctor's office or just a regular checkup a little over a year ago, I asked, how many people do you see in a day that have diabetes? And her scribe looked at her and she said, I think it's like 70%. And her scribe said, oh no, it's more than that.
Oh
so,
God.
Like you said, when is this tipping point? But what I would leave for you guys is just the fact that I don't know how often I can say this or how many different ways I can say this, but your body's ability to heal is incredible. Like if you've tried a million different things, Weight Watchers, counting calories, exercising till you're blue in the face, starving yourself, it is time to eat in a way that aligns with your human physiology. And dietitians too. Like, we can be a living example. And when you eat protein and you eat fats and you keep your carbohydrates low, it changes your life. It changes your life. I feel like that's my gift back to the community. It's like sharing my story. You know, I was at a point where, like I said, anxious, inflamed, dealing with suicidal ideation. Like I was running a ton and I completely gave it up thinking this is done for me. And now I'm able to train for ultra races. You know, I just won a 50-mile race, and this is on a low carbohydrate animal-based diet. So
and for those of you who don't know Michelle's story, the Dietitian's Dilemma tells her personal story. And I'll just tell you, she was sick. She was really, really sick. And now she is the literal picture of health. Just won an ultra marathon. What was it, 50 miles or some obscene amount that you ran and you won for your age division?
I won the whole thing, Dr. Berry.
Oh, well, I'm sorry.
No, it's cool. My last race was in Chicago. It was a 50-mile race, and I was the first female, so that was cool. But yeah, I was very sick. I was 12 years old, 5 feet tall, 57.5 pounds. So I go into that story, and that's another thing. You know, it's, you know, we're talking here about type 2 diabetes, but if you are dealing with an eating disorder or major depression, I know what it's like to feel hopeless. And if you had told me that changing the way you eat could significantly help your brain, I mean, this is after decades of suffering, I would have said like, yeah, okay, I'll feel a little better. It 360, it changed my life. Absolutely changed my life. So that would be my message to people. And once again, you have nothing to lose. Approach this with some curiosity. Grab a health coach, grab Dr. Berry's book, you know, do some research. This can absolutely change your life. And yeah, if you want to follow me, I'm on Instagram at Run, Eat, Meet, Repeat. I'm also on X at Michelle Hurn RD. My book, The Dietitian's Dilemma. I also have a kid's book, The Fox Family Food Fight. And what else? Oh, and then the dietitiansdilemma.net is my website.
Beautiful. And I'll link to all that in the show notes when I post this on my YouTube channel. Michelle Hurn, thank you so much. Thanks for the work you're doing. And thanks for being here with me today. This has been amazing. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Bye-bye.